So now we're going to hear the paper of Juan Ruiz Souza, who is, as I mentioned at the beginning, unfortunately unable to be here thanks to the overzealousness of the Department of Homeland Security. And instead we are going to hear his paper from Maria Feliciano, who we will hear her own paper after our coffee break this morning. But I'll give you a brief introduction to Juan Carlos. He is professor of art history at the Complutense University in Madrid. His research has focused particularly on the mutual artistic influences between Al-Andalus and the Crown of Castile in the later Middle Ages, and on a revision of the concept of mudéjar art. And he's currently working on late medieval palace architecture, and especially on the Alhambra of Granada and the Alcázar of Seville. And today he'll be talking, well, Lily will be talking on his behalf about the ways in which Al-Andalus and Castile both looked to the past. So please join me in welcoming Lily Feliciano, Juan Carlos in absentia.
Well, first of all, I hope you're tolerant of me as I go through this. This happened very quickly, and I'm not him. And also I'm not him because he's a fabulous speaker, actually, and quite performative. So, you know, it's like you wanted Britney Spears, but you got some garage band somewhere. It's just kind of sad. I'm working off of 2 texts. All right, so also be patient with me, all right? And I'll try to keep to the time appointed. This paper examines the dialogue that existed between medieval Spanish architecture and a previously existing monumental landscape, or landscapes in the plural. When studying the Historia de España of Alfonso, did I just? No, perfect, okay. First mistake. When studying the Historia de España of Alfonso X, known as the Wise, from the second half of the 13th century, we find buildings and monuments from the Roman, Visigothic, and Andalusi past. The Church of San Román in Toledo, built in the times of Archbishop Rodrigo Jiménez de Rada in the second quarter of the 13th century, allows us to study the reuse of spolia from the Roman and Visigothic constructive materials, mainly columns and capitals from ancient buildings. Pedro I of Castile built his palace, the Cuarto Real, alongside the Plaza de la Monteria in the Alcázar of Seville, a century after, in the 1360s. In this palace, we will similarly find Roman, Visigothic, and Andalusi spolia. Alfonso X, Rodrigo Jiménez de Rada, and Pedro I all used architectural theory and practice in their construction of Castilian identity. Long before them, however, it is also possible to study the same identity building project throughout Al-Andalus in 9th and 10th century Umayyad Cordoba and in the Almohad Sevilla of the 12th century. How then did Jiménez de Rada, Alfonso X, and Pedro I introduce Al-Andalus into the history of Spain? How was it possible? We will find the cultural key in Toledo in the 12th century in the Christian Mozarab community. The Mozarabs, of course, Arabized Christian. A great deal is changing regarding the view of Islamic Spain and the various ways in which Al-Andalus was incorporated into the historical narrative that shaped the kingdoms of Castile and Leon from the Middle Ages. The historiography of Western art has long delayed in overcoming its own approaches and an understanding that messages have much more to say beyond the limits of religion and form. 19th century texts written after the Enlightenment of the 18th century cast a shadow over the original messages conveyed by the most important architectural projects in Al-Andalus, obscuring them into oblivion. At the same time, the functional and conceptual peculiarities intrinsic to Islamic art as a whole were forgotten. It was additionally not accepted that the symbols of Islamic art might equally claim to have accomplished political objectives that were similar to those that could also be embodied in the great works of medieval Christian art. It is with difficulty that artistic symbols of any civilization can be understood if the basic codes of interpretation are omitted. The art of Al-Andalus was altered and reshaped within a romantic sentiment that preferred to link it to the exotic and the oriental, and therefore with the principles of a civilization regarded as morally inferior to classical Greek and Roman art, which were connected to the quintessential origins of European culture. Likewise, the art of Al-Andalus was partially effaced by a nationalistic reframing of Spanish art. In other words, the origin and development of a historiography for Mudéjar and Mozarabic art made the claim that this art was Christian in its functioning and patronage, and was simultaneously capable of mastering and including Andalusi decorative influences without the danger of contamination. I'll make a little aside here and maybe clarify what Mudéjar and Mozarabic is for those who don't know. The Mozarabic community, like I mentioned before, were the Musta'arabun, the Arabized Christians, right, who lived and were thought to also have preceded in some ways the caliphal encroachment, but that survived as Christians in spite of a big project of Islamization. And the Mudéjar is a complete work of fiction created in the mid-19th century that basically, in trying to identify a Spanish national character in art, came up with this idea that the art of conquered Muslims, right, working and living under Christian rule could produce these kind of exotic hybrid that functioned as ornamentation generally in Christian structures. So that's what he's talking about there. The above explains some of the reasons why the historiography of European art, which should have included Al-Andalus, was not able to easily or automatically recognize architectural spaces that had no equivalent in the art commonly known as Western. For example, it is not easy to identify a madrasa, a specific place where teaching took place, when the same location could also be tied to mystics of great religious and social fame, a zawiya or a khanka, as well as a place where both the teaching of medicine and medical assistant was practiced, the maristan. At the risk of some errors, a quick summary of other places that must also be remembered include the majlis, as we just heard a bit about, right, which could act as both a ceremonial room or a venue for meetings or intellectual discussions. Caravanserai, which referred to a building that could serve as a stopover point for merchants and their goods, that may have been looked after by a type of brotherhood. As a result, its meaning could be connected to the ribat or the khanka, places where holy men retreated to live in community. The word marabut describes a place linked to a great holy man and his prestige, which could become a place of pilgrimage, and these terms could change meaning over time. It is difficult to understand the above. If it is difficult to understand the above, it is even more difficult to understand that before the Christians, Andalusi art expressed its identity through powerful symbolic messages that were later copied by the Christian kingdoms in the north of the peninsula. Late Roman and Visigothic Hispania were revived as sources of legitimacy and political differentiation, first by Al-Andalus and then by the Christian kingdoms. Before continuing, let us consider the political dimensions of the deliberate recycling of spolia, former construction material, especially columns and capitals, in highly important architectural projects. The use of construction material taken from the past deliberately for legitimizing, in any sense, political, economic, etc., has been a common practice throughout history. The 4th century Roman architect Constantine used fine construction material from Trajan, Hadrian, and Marcus Aurelius, but not Nero or Caligula, for example. That's an excellent point, actually. I had never thought about that. Juan Carlos, if you're looking at us, right? Thank you. Therefore, is he gonna be? No, too bad. Therefore, thinking that only financial or practical reasons were behind this, choice with no ideology is not a convincing argument, and we prefer a political and ideological reading, as Brenk or Elsner do. The use of spolia throughout late antiquity became a constant. And thus it is seen in the Carolingian period, in the Islamic and the Byzantine environments, and the hillside city of Oviedo in northern Spain also makes echo of this. Oh. It is surprising to observe that in the 9th century in Asturias, Cordoba, and Aachen, ancient materials were reused for display in, I see what I just did, my apologies. Were reused for display in emblematic buildings, built at the same time. Charlemagne looked to Ravenna, the natural successor of Rome, and took building material from there for his projects in Aachen. Alfonso II and the kings of Asturias in the northern Spain, who followed him, as well as Abdel Rahman II of Cordoba, sought their source of political legitimacy in Roman and Visigothic Hispania, and did not hesitate to include in their most important artistic undertakings spolia from different Hispano-Roman and Hispano-Visigothic buildings. In the 10th century, caliphs in Cordoba did the same in the city of Medinat al-Zahra. In this way, similar processes are seen in the west of late antiquity that fought to reclaim the validity of a partially lost order to which those cited above considered themselves the legitimate heirs, and which explain their very existence. Okay, so here I have kind of tenuous image instructions. Here we go. This is obviously an image of the Mosque of Cordoba. We know where the spolia was coming from, which is like literally next door. They didn't have to travel far to get any of this. Cercadilla is the archaeological site, and you can walk to it from the mosque in about 10 minutes, right? More images from the Mosque of Cordoba. Spolia of different heights, of different periods, right? Which made a technological problem for the architects in charge of construction. Aachen and Ravenna using Roman spolia, just as he mentioned. And now we move. I did it. All right. My apologies. There seems to be. No. Here we go. There seems to be a missing bit here. So, let's see. He's going to Oviedo, and I'm starting later here. So there seems to be something missing between one page and the other. It doesn't matter. So, in 1086, after Alfonso VI's arrival in Toledo, the city became the face of. This is not right. Yeah, there is a. We are, yeah. Interesting. Well, we can try. We start with the Kingdom of Castile in the Middle Ages. Like, can I, Santa Cristina, I'll start and we'll figure out how the images are, right? We start with the Kingdom of Castile. Let's go back. But it's Asturias here, which is what I don't understand. Yeah, we're working with two copies, like I said.
So I think these
510, right?
5 and 10 is
Yeah.
it's the three places he was just talking about,
Right.
right? So we've got Cordoba, Aachen, and Oviedo.
Right, we moved on.
And then, so this is part of...
Roman and Visigothic Hispania, right? Al-Andalus and the Kingdom of Castile in...
Yep, that's
right?
what comes next, yep.
So there seems to be a little bit of a hiccup in the... Let's...
Yeah, this is,
Right?
yeah.
Okay, we'll keep on reading and hopefully at some point there will be we'll catch up. We start with the Kingdom of Castile in the Middle Ages and a reminder of the theoretical approaches developed by both the Archbishop of Toledo, Jimenez de Rada, as we mentioned, and King Alfonso X in the 13th century, following the victory of Christian soldiers in Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212 against the Almohads Empire of Seville. Both men were capable of designing a complete political project for the future that made it possible to integrate a Hispanic cultural diversity in which Al-Andalus also took place. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and advance and see if we get to Toledo somehow. So bear with me because here. Okay. You know, let's not just gloss over this. Let's try to give it some context. The Astur region is actually quite fascinating, right? It's the cradle, it's the birthplace of the myth of the Reconquest. So how are they going to frame themselves as the heirs of the rightful ownership of the land if it is not looking at the time before the Arab conquest? And I think this is what he's trying to do here. Santullano in Oviedo was a hunting lodge. It is now a church, as things happen. But it is, you know, as a place of you know, kingly leisure, it is filled with spolia as well. So it's constantly, right, reminding the Astur monarch about his place in the land. I'll leave it at that, right, and jump right to San Roman. A great political project was implemented in the Church of San Roman in Toledo in the last quarter of the 13th century, when Jimenez de Rada was the city's archbishop. There, the past was reclaimed in order to smooth the way to the future. The church shows the need at the time to resolve a conflict in the city's Christian population by using both the architectural qualities and painting of the building for the purpose of unification, or peaceful coexistence between two rival Christian liturgies that existed in the city: the Roman or French ritual imposed on the city in the 11th century after Alfonso VI's conquest, and the Hispanic ritual, also known as Visigothic or Toledan, which was of pre-Islamic origin. In his chronicle, Jimenez de Rada laments the loss of the Hispanic liturgy after Alfonso VI conquered the city. A related tribute to the Mozarab community and a reference to the fact that there were two rituals can also be found in the San Roman Basilica, where former Roman and Visigothic material was used and a large horseshoe arches were erected. These arches were painted with a radial pattern to divide the voussoirs above the impost line. That is similar to pre-Islamic horseshoe arches and is an obvious allusion to the late Roman Christian origins of the city that the Mozarab community wished to join. These radial pattern paintings, made together and at the same date as the church's construction, also show a combination of inscriptions in Latin and in Arabic. Arabic was the identifying language of the Mozarab Christians who adhered to Hispanic rituals under Islamic rule of the city between the 8th and the 11th centuries. Unsurprisingly, this community gradually became Arabized over the 4 centuries of Andalusi dominance. After Alfonso VI's arrival in 1086, the city became the face of the reformed Roman ritual, promoted by the monarchy and Cluniac monks, as a sign of the Europeanization of the Hispanic kingdoms, which marked an unbridgeable gap between the former ancient and conservative liturgy of Mozarab Christians. The same church of San Roman in Toledo also shows the fathers of the Hispanic church, Saint Isidore and San Leandro, together with those identified with the Roman reform, which are Gregory and Saint Bernard. Alfonso the Wise led the next step. His scriptorium produced the Historia de España, which lists in chronological order events from pagan, Christian, Hebrew, and Al-Andalus. The Historia starts in Seville with the appearance of Hercules and ends in the same city with the arrival of Fernando III, his father. It gives an excellent account of the start of the Arabization of Spain in late antiquity by telling us how shortly after the Moors arrived, the Mozarabs translated the Christian Holy Scriptures into Arabic, which was their language. The existence of Arabic writing in the Church of San Román or others, such as Cristo de la Luz, also in Toledo, proves that through the Arabic language, the Christian community could be mentioned and identified. In Alfonso's chronicle, without going into the problems of its creation and completion, the really new idea is to find praise for the Roman architects, the Visigoth kings, Leogibildo, Sisebuto, and Bamba, the Asturian kings, Alfonso II and Ramiro I, and the Cordoban emirs, all in the same discourse. That is to say, no one is left out. Alfonso's chronicle also speaks equally about the Roman bridge in Alcántara in Cáceres, the start of the mosque in Cordoba, the Asturian pre-Romanesque works at Monte Naranco de Oviedo, the cathedral at Santiago de Compostela, and the great minaret of the Almohad Mosque of Seville. To put Roman, Visigothic, Umayyad, Asturian, and Almohad works on the same level has a unique qualitative value. The chronicle makes it clear that it is aware that Spain in the 13th century springs from a rich and diverse cultural background. If a religion presents relics as the ultimate and incontrovertible basis for its beliefs, chronicle political discourse, I don't understand that, but similarly recognizes the material heritage of the past. That one skipped past me, I read this last night. Since within this preserved evidence lays the truthfulness of its claims. It is a heritage that is likewise preserved deliberately. Moving forward a few decades, we have caught up. King Pedro I built his palaces in the heart of the Alcázar in Seville in the third quarter of the 14th century. Crossing the Great Triumphal Arch preceding the Plaza de la Monteria brings us to the majestic facade of the same name built in 1364. We have stated above how the value of monuments from the past manifested themselves in the works of Alfonso X. In the Monteria Palace, however, we can observe how this theory, found in the Historia de España, materializes into a single architectural project. The Plaza de la Monteria, with its inscriptions, its throne room, its gallery that opens onto a square, and its hall that gives access to the palace, together comprise an important declaration of intention to claim historical legitimacy. In the Historia de España, we can see how Roman, Visigothic, and Al-Andalus works that were fundamental to Alfonso X's work, reshaped Spain, were introduced in a single discourse. We can likewise observe exactly the same in the whole of the above-mentioned North Gallery in Pedro I's palace. The throne room on the second floor lies in the center of the Monteria facade and opens over the square where ancient columns stand, purposely chosen from Roman and Visigothic material. Okay, here we go with a few slides, one after the other. So, this is the facade looking right at the plaza that he mentions. That was 3, okay. And he is singling out the entrance with the spoliated material, I get a sense, and of course, that triumphal entrance. Okay. However, it does not end with this recycled material or spolia. As with Alfonso's work, the Cordoba of the 10th century is also present. Ta-da! So I think what he's trying to do is lead your eyes to the reuse of the columns on the sides, if you can identify that, and then hone in. The Cordoba of the 10th century is also present, so this is probably where I should stop. in Umayyad capitals from far away, certainly from Cordoba itself, are found inside the throne room and arranged across a whole facade, whose general design is a visual throwback to Almohad and Nazarid art. All the salvage material is complemented by the heraldry of castles, lions, inscriptions in Arabic and Spanish, and that of King Pedro I himself, who used all of these methods to ensure his presence. So I think we are also have fallen behind a bit. Roman, Visigothic, and then now we talk about Umayyad spolia. So all the salvage material is complemented by the heraldry of castles, lions, inscriptions in Arabic and Spanish, and that of King Pedro I himself, who used all of these methods to ensure his presence. The Monteria facade has a large text of praise in Spanish that surrounds another in Arabic. Has he identified it here? I'm trying to see if... Yeah, there you go. Right, so... The Spanish inscription reads, "The Most High, Don Pedro, by the grace of God, King of Castile and Leon, ordered these fortresses and palaces and portals to be built, which was done in the year of 1402, or 1364. An inscription surrounding a large blue and white ceramic frieze is repeated 8 times, and there's no conqueror except but God. It is curious that the same Christian and Muslim God is quoted together with the name of King Pedro, surrounded by such a rich and varied spolia. Under this deictic inscription referring to the monarch and above the gate leading into the palace, the previously mentioned gallery or platform of the large high rooms opens to where King Pedro would show himself. The king is presented twice in the same facade through the space preserved for him, the gallery, and the inscription above with his name, both of which are located at the same central axis of the portal, so that together they form a visual and textual meta-representation of the king. We are faced with a huge theatrical set, the maximum symbol of the king's power and the widely known genesis of the modern state. Might want to take you back to this. This is an area that has been seeing a lot of development in research lately. It's this ventanas de aparición, they call it, right? These spaces where the presence of the king or even the nobility, ducal homes have these windows or these rooms as well. Where I think it's not just framing the theatrical presentation of the body when it's there, but also a reminder when is absent. So I think this is where he's trying to go at. The many groundbreaking studies by Professor Susana Calvo Capilla open and diversify the political background of the great construction works of the Umayyads of Cordoba. If we have recently attended to the rich historiographical debate on the rupture, continuity of the Visigoths and Umayyads before the magic date of 711 and the enigmatic 8th century, Professor Calvo Capilla asks us to look at the political dimensions of the city palace of Medinat al-Zahra and the great Mosque of Cordoba. These works look towards Constantinople just as the first Umayyad caliphs of Damascus did, but they also recognize Roman and Visigothic Hispania through the use of recycled materials. Some years earlier, Professor Antonio Peña had already proved that part of the most beautiful Roman material for enlarging or expanding the Cordoba Mosque in the 9th century came directly from Mérida, a considerable distance away. This is strange considering that the city itself on the Guadalquivir River, that is Cordoba, had numerous buildings and sites where first-class Roman and Visigothic materials could be found. It has been customary to interpret the Umayyad projects in Cordoba in the shadow of, rather than parallel to, the expansionist constructions of the Fatimids in North Africa. It's not advancing now. It did? Oh. Want to go back? Here we go. Okay. There we go. Calvo Capilla talks of continuity for two reasons: to imitate the actions of the Umayyads in Damascus and to reclaim the ancient and late Roman past of Hispania. An important reality should be considered here. During the expansion to the west, Islam met with Visigothic Hispania, the most consolidated and best organized territory politically speaking, with its well-defined territory, a capital in Toledo, single religion, and legal system, compared to the other regions where it was growing throughout North Africa. Al-Andalus found in the Hispania of late antiquity its own identifying roots, which made it different from the rest of Islam. After the fall of Cordoba and the dissolution of the Taifa kingdoms by Almoravid invaders, it can be said that only the Almohad Empire. Oh, I'm sorry. This again, my numbers don't match what's on necessarily what is on the page. After the fall of Cordoba, and the type. I'm about to lose it here. Once more. Politics had returned to the peninsula's historical past. The most important preserved building is the minaret of the Great Mosque, built at the end of the 12th century, the Giralda. So we are still back here, and I'm just gonna go and fast forward. Okay, here we go. Yay! Yay! Yeah, he should put more numbers on the thing. The poor guy, though. Systematically, it provides a glimpse of the most important moments of the peninsula past. The base still preserves a large set of Roman altars. Higher up, the Roman material is combined with Visigothic and Umayyad columns and capitals. Okay, here we go with a string of Roman altars. Okay. In this way, the same historical sequential display that Pedro I put in his palace, also in Seville, in the third quarter of the 14th century, can be seen almost 2 centuries earlier. It is surprising that King Pedro could observe, or rather have a visual dialogue with, the great Almohad minaret from his elevated throne room in the palace. The two buildings have a similar political message: history, continuity, and legitimacy. As a conclusion, the inclusion of the Umayyads, Almohads, and Nasrids in Spain's history following the fall of Al-Andalus in 1492. Spolia from Al-Andalus would ultimately be treated in the same way as the Roman heritage. So he wants me here, he sent me a note, to include a note about the fact that Santa Clara in Tordesillas, this is in central Castile, but it's part of Pedro I's, world of influence, is really engaging in a dialogue with the Maksura of the caliphal Mosque of Cordoba, and that this is acknowledged in contemporary literature. So, for example, Juan Manuel's El Conde Lucanor, an early text of literature, makes note of this pretty early on. Around 1500, a politician, humanist, and leading figure in the court of Isabel the Catholic, named Gutierrez de Cárdenas, placed a whole series of capitals from the Cordoba Caliphate on the great facade of the Collegiate Church of Torrijos. This is the Capilla Dorada that Don Juan Manuel mentions, and this is part of the reuse, and you can see the reuse of building material there. Oh my goodness, this really is not. Okay, here we go. We're in Torrijos. Here we go. So Gutierrez de Cárdenas placed a whole series of capitals from the Cordoba Caliphate on the great facade of the Collegiate Church of Torrijos in Toledo. It dates to about 1508, actually, at the behest of himself and his wife, Teresa Enriquez. Actually, it should be the other way around. Teresa Enriquez made it at the behest of the husband. He had died by this time. These were part of a classicist program in keeping with the singularity of Spain in the years of the 16th century, well into the Gothic period. According to a study on the Kingdom of Aragon, it is impossible to find anything similar anywhere else on the peninsula. Umayyad Cordoba now formed part of antiquity in modern Spain. I will add detail to this. Gutierrez de Cárdenas was really the right-hand man of Isabel of Castile, right? He's the guy who actually went into the Alhambra of Granada in the cover of night, secured, right, the assurances of Boabdil that he would surrender the next day, grabbed the keys of the city, and came back, to Santa Fe. He was that kind of man. His wife, Teresa Enriquez, was a cousin of Ferdinand of Aragon. So these were not just anybody. And he was an antiquarian. He had a classical art collection that included pieces from, Umayyad Cordoba. I don't think that these are necessarily Medinat al-Zahra. These are probably from the Munyas that were, destroyed all over the countryside right outside it. But who knows? We don't really understand. The fact is that this is the earliest large-scale ecclesiastical work of classicizing vocabulary in Spain at the time. The only other contender for the role would be the Cathedral of Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic, right, that used this kind of classicizing vocabulary. So this was tremendously innovative, and the fact that it includes so much spolia is fascinating, as he well mentions. I have a string of stars now, so hold on. This is, these are the images from the Colegiata de Torrijos, which Teresa Enriquez, she was called La Loca del Sacramento. She was obsessed with the Holy Sacrament and, and instituting it as a performance in Spain, has this place built. And so Juan Carlos and I have been thinking for many years, actually, to start a research project on this. And here is the spoliated material. Ooh, I have to say that it seems to be a talking facade as well, like a backdrop, a theatrical backdrop for the performances of Corpus Christi celebrations, perhaps. It is also full of musical representations, musical notations, and entire strings of actual sheet music in it, the representation of musical instruments, angels playing music. So again, it's this kind of speaking facade that also foreshadows what happens in the New World by a good 30 years. So. Okay. Sancho Ortiz de Matienzo, treasurer of the Casa de Contratación in Seville and canon of Seville Cathedral, ordered a sculpture of the Giralda, the most important Almohad construction in Al-Andalus, to be used as the foundation stone of his chapel in the parish church of his birthplace, Villasaña de Mena, in the north of the province of Burgos in 1499. As stated in the inscription that still surrounds the image of the famous minaret and the stone, the most emblematic building in Almohad architecture now formed part of the treasurer's most heartfelt collective memory at the end of the 15th century. The Nasrid Alhambra is also seen on many Christian buildings of the monarchy and nobility around 1500. To give but a few examples, the entrance gates to the city palace of Granada are copied onto access points in walls, such as the gate preserved in Las Huelgas Reales in Valladolid, or onto the portals of some of the Spanish churches, such as San Andrés de Aguilar del Campo. I'm wondering if he's no, these are just mentions. Founded by the Admiral of Castile and Enrique II's son, Fadrique Enriquez. Again, these are the same Enriquez that connect you to Torrijos. The facades, especially the one facing west, are a deliberate reminder of the monumental gates of the Alhambra, particularly at the Siete Suelos. Okay, so that is something I cannot help you with right now. In the first part of this paper, we discussed Archbishop Rodriguez Jimenez de Rada and Pedro I. We have recalled San Román in Toledo and the palace of King Pedro I at the Alcázares in Seville. What work of art can be remembered from the reign of Alfonso X the Wise, apart from his valuable chronicles? Without doubt, the best document explaining the uniqueness and cultural diversity of the Kingdom of Castile that this article or this exposition mentions, and which explains the foundations that made it possible to deliberately conserve or preserve the heritage of Al-Andalus for the future is the marble what? So, that was not an epitaph. Anyway, the marble epitaph of Alfonso X, the one he ordered to be placed on the tomb of his father, Fernando III, in Castile, which is a trilingual, right, as we know. A trilingual monument in Seville Cathedral on his death in 1252. It contains the same text praising the monarch, written out in the 4 languages used in his territory: Latin, Arabic, Hebrew, and Spanish. These texts are joined with vertical bands decorated with the castles and lions of royal heraldry. It is difficult to find a comparable document in the Middle Ages that so successfully expresses an inclusive discourse of the cultural wealth of the Kingdom of Castile and Leon. Jiménez de Rada and Alfonso X were able to develop their projects in the 13th century because they understood what Mozarabic Toledo meant in the previous century. When the famous school of translators of Toledo began working with Archbishop Don Raimundo in the 12th century, scholars from the 3 religions opened the ancient world to Europe because they systematically translated Arabic manuscripts, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, astrology, medicine, etc., into Castilian. Okay, so he wanted me to show you some of these transformations, right? Cristo de la Luz is one of these foundational structures that people consider one of the seeds of this kind of mudéjar art, right? Alfonso's coining, right? Also exploiting diversity. And I'm going to stop there because it really is not matching anything else that I do, because it's over. It's so.